So recently, my wife sent me a text with a photo bragging about how much weight she's lost. And I replied, wow. At least I thought I did. I honestly didn't pay that much attention to what I typed, because when I did go back and look at it, I realized instead of wow, I typed cow. It wasn't pretty. Yeah. She wasn't laughing like you, though. What I should have done is taken a breath, edited the text, and made the most of my wow. I call this part of the one and done syndrome, and trust me, after that text, I was done for a while. So, I have been a creative person my entire life. I've been a professional artist for over 45 years. Starting back when I was 12, I had a contract with Schwinn designing my own line of skateboards. I have written 13 books, as he mentioned, hundreds of articles. I was even a designer in Hollywood for a number of years, and that was really cool. And as I was in all of my creative endeavors, I would usually start with a rough draft, a sketch, an outline, and slowly massage it, work it, build it up. And sometimes that would take a while. And that's a problem when you're working under really tight deadlines. So when I was under a tight deadline, why wouldn't I just start with my final draft first? Because it would suck. And yet, with my decades of experience, I still have a tendency, as you saw from my text, to send out my first draft without letting it breathe. So why is it we so often stop after our first attempt at something? Whether it's a business proposal or a drawing, an article, something you might be writing, or something as simple as replying to a text. But far too often we do stop after our first attempt, a one and done, and it happens to the best of us. For instance, just recently, in another true story, I had sent an invoice to a client for $900. And I do this all the time. I didn't even bother taking a look at the invoice before I sent it to him. And he calls me and he said, Mark, there's something odd about this invoice. It's for only $90. I thought, oh, shit. I didn't want to give this guy that kind of discount. Luckily, he was really honest. Everything's cool. Or let's say you're putting together an employment contract for somebody, and you want it to say in one line, in this job, you must not do this. Great, you start typing, your mind is saying you must not do this, but your fingers end up typing you must do this. Easy to miss one word when you're typing, especially if you don't go back and double check it. The problem is missing that one word not reverses the meaning of the contract. And it scares me when I catch myself making mistakes like this. But what scares me even more are the times I don't catch it, especially if I have a client who might not be quite so honest. So how do we go from our first draft, our raw look at something, to the award-winning version of whatever it is that you're working on? Well, by simply getting started. Just put down the first thing that comes to mind. And it doesn't matter how bad it is, as long as you're willing to go back and make it better. You see, far too many people try to perfect things in their head before they'll commit it to paper. But even if you do that, how often is that first thing you put down going to be perfect? Well, I'll give you a hint. It's never. You see, you can't create perfect until you get through all of that other crap. And then you can take a breath and create your wow. For the past 35 years or so, I have been a professional storyboard artist, working on literally thousands of your favorite movies and TV shows. Like you mentioned, the popular ones are Stranger Things and The Walking Dead. Another popular one is The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. And as a storyboard artist, I illustrate the director's vision of a script and add my own enhancements. Now, this is important to remember, because if you read a script and let's say you read a script, you both are going to have completely different images in your mind of what it's supposed to look like. But the only vision that matters is the director's. And so production takes my storyboards and they're used as a blueprint for the crew to follow. For years, I would draw one and only one version of my storyboards and I'd consider it done. Because you see, I am really good at getting inside a director's head on my first attempt. I'd clean up the artwork, deliver it to them. They love it. Everybody's happy. Yeah. And then I met Alex Zam, a director I've worked with a number of times since. Alex had the audacity to sit and think about my storyboards and then come back to me with new thoughts and changes. And that caused me to redraw a bunch of stuff, and, well, it got better. And look, at first it was really frustrating. I mean, I was at times throwing out a ton of work. But as I started to see that the sequences in the story were getting better and better, I started to kind of relax and almost enjoy the process. And I realized that my earlier attempts weren't failures, they were steps. They were steps towards a better result, steps towards telling a better story. So with whatever it is that you're working on, regardless of how perfect you think it might be, even if you think it's unbreakable, break it. See if there's a better way to do it. And if not, that's fine, because you still have your earlier attempts that you can go back to. But at least by breaking it, you're giving yourself an opportunity to take a breath and create your wow. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Toy Story series of movies, right? With only 9 months to go before it was released into movie theaters, Pixar threw out everything they had done on Toy Story 2, including a lot of finished animation. Now, it's important for you to understand that it usually takes between 3 and 5 years to produce an animated feature of the quality that Pixar does. And they were willing to redo the entire thing in just 9 months because they had a better idea. You see, just because something exists doesn't mean it's perfect. I mean, even with scripts, when we're working on these big productions, we are constantly editing and revising scripts literally until the moment we shoot them. In fact, this happens so often, there's actually an old industry saying that scripts are never done, they're just produced. Just like anything you work on, realistically is never done, you just have a deadline, hopefully. So just within that deadline, give yourself enough time to let it breathe. And I've tried to use my experiences in Hollywood to influence other areas of my life, like when I'm putting together a new pitch, or writing another book or article, or for God's sake, when I'm replying to a text from my wife. I definitely now take a breath to create my wow. A few years ago, I finished my memoir, Attacked. It's a true story that happened to my family and me. I'm the first person in the country to hold parents responsible for the illegal actions of their kids in a court of law. When I was a teenager, growing up in Houston, Texas, I was at an outdoor bonfire party, and I was attacked by about 30 kids. And a few of the ringleaders who had been my bullies in high school followed me home, tried to kill me, and attacked my entire family in our own front yard. And I had their parents arrested. Now, you might remember a couple years ago, there was the Michigan school shooter case. Those parents were arrested partly because they had supplied their kid with the gun that he had used in the attack. And their court case is partially based on my trial, which luckily I had won. Now, as I was writing that book, I knew that in order for you, the readers, you're going to read it, right? For you, the readers, to understand why these guys were after me and why I was the one person in my high school to be able to stand up against this gang, there's a lot of backstory you really needed to understand. And so by the time I finished writing the first draft of my book, I was easily 150 pages in before anything big and exciting happened, and I knew that wasn't going to be good enough. I didn't want to bore the reader. So I put it aside. I let it breathe. And I thought about it, and I talked to people about it. And I was having lunch one day with a Hollywood screenwriter friend of mine, and we were talking about my story. And he said, why don't you just do what we do in the movies? Start with a big action scene, and then go back and tell the backstory that led up to it. And I went, I've been doing this over 30 years. Why didn't I think of that? But that's what I did. I start with that big scene where I'm attacked by 30 kids. And I tell the backstory of what led up to that. And then I peppered in other action and things throughout the whole thing. And now it's a really engaging read. In fact, it reads like a Hollywood movie. Now, you might not be creating the next Hollywood blockbuster, but what you do matters to you and everyone around you. And everything you do deserves to be done as well as it could possibly be done. And if you're playing that old one-and-done routine, trust me, you're not giving it the benefit, and it's never going to be as good as it could possibly be. So here's what I want you to do. The next time you go to the office or sit at your computer or maybe at a drawing table, I want you to put down the first thing that comes to mind. And then I want you to get up, walk away. Let it breathe. When you come back, I want you to be willing to make changes to any or all of it. Because you can't create perfect till you get all that imperfect out of the way. So don't have a cow. Take a breath and say with me, create your wow. Thank you very much.